so let's talk about the second component now of your mixing environment, and that's going to be your room. Your room plays a crucial part in how your mixes come together. It's the difference between you making a mix sound good in an hour versus 2 weeks, because you're fighting against all these issues that your room's presenting you. So let's go over how you can fix some of these issues and make your mixing life a little easier. So, I'm aware that most of you do not have rooms that look like this one in the picture. Most of you probably have studios that kind of look like this, or perhaps a little bit like this, or maybe even like this. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to point out deficiencies in there and then let you know how to fix things up. So let's take a look at before and after pictures. So this is a pretty typical home studio for the bedroom producer DJ, okay? So he's got the speakers on top of what maybe looks like some books, as well as a little studio station crammed into the corner. So this is the before picture, and this is the after, okay? So the two main things that's happened is there's been some decoupling of the speakers from the desk. So that's a fancy way of saying that they have taken the speakers and put them on some foam, okay? So what happens is speakers vibrate to produce sound, okay? And so what happens in this previous picture is when the speakers are vibrating, they are gonna transmit that sound down through this desk here, and it's gonna vibrate the desk, and it can even vibrate all the way through the floor and generate some mud sounds in your room just because of these weird vibrations. So granted, he does have them on these little stands, but they're not as good as getting some dedicated foam stands like these. So these are specifically made to absorb vibrations. So now when the speakers vibrate, that foam absorbs everything, the desk stays quiet, the floor stays quiet, nothing else vibrates, and all of a sudden your speakers sound a little clearer. It sounds a little bit like black magic, but it does work. Also, you can see here he's got reflective panels behind, which are not going to do anything for the low end, and I'll go over that in a second as to why. However, it is going to disperse some reflections for high-end content. So if you had, if you clap your hands and you get that reverb echo of the clap bouncing around, this is going to help with that. So that's two very, very cheap and minimal things that you can do, but let's go forward and see how you can get some more bang for your buck in your studio. Now, this guy here has a fairly well-treated studio. It's still a little ghetto looking, but there's some very, very key points to point out in here. Now, you'll notice, look at the corners of the rooms, okay? The corners in the rooms have bass trapping on them, not just where 2 walls meet, but where 3 walls meet, okay? So if you consider the ceiling and the floor as being a wall as well, you have 2 walls joining, with a ceiling on top, you've got a corner where 3 panels are joining, okay? Terrible. This is where you need to fix up. So these are the hot spots or the crucial points where if you can manage these in your studio and you can get them covered with a bass trap, the bass trap's function is to absorb sound that's bouncing around. Now, for those of you who don't know, you imagine a speaker that's pushing out sound, right? You get the big subwoofer, when it pushes out sound and then it goes back in again, it's creating a literal sound wave, right? So it's pushing air, and that air will hit a wall and it'll bounce and it'll bounce and it'll bounce off other walls and go all around. And when you get a culmination of those frequencies bouncing around in your room, it adds up to mud. So what these bass traps do is they absorb that pressure and they disperse it inside them, right? So it hits the bass trap and it basically gets sucked in and absorbed and it doesn't bounce around. Now, the 3-corner join that I was talking about earlier, this is horrific because what happens is the sound goes in there and it bounces off one corner, it bounces off another one, and it just kind of bounces around in there. And they sometimes can add onto each other. I'm going to explain that in a second. But what happens is it generates mud, basically. And the more that you can get rid of that mud, the cleaner your mixes are going to sound and the faster you're going to get good sounding mixes out of your studio. The reason that this buildup occurs is because of the way that sound works when it hits another sound. And that is all dependent on something called phase. So as you see here, this chart, we have our speaker here, and imagine that this yellow wave is like this super sick 808 kick drum, okay? So here it's a sine wave, but we all know it's probably an 808. It's gonna output our 808, okay? So it goes out like this, up and down, up and down, up and down, and then it hits your wall, okay? And if you don't have any acoustic treatment on your wall, what's gonna happen is that sound is gonna bounce back. Now, how that sound bounces back is going to be dependent on multiple factors, like how far away your wall is from your speakers, how big your speakers are, how loud they are, etc., etc. Now let's say this wave bounces back at the exact opposite phase, which means that every time the original one goes up, this bounced back version is going down, okay? So you can see here the red is our bounce back. So what happens, if you imagine back from your high school math days, imagine this is one of those fancy graphs that you had to do in math, okay? Because really, unfortunately, this is all math. Now, imagine that this is a +1 up here at the top of this graph, and this is -1 down here, okay? So what happens if you take +1 and then you add -1 to it? What do you get? 0, right? So what's happening now is because this is bouncing back completely out of phase, i.e. it is the exact opposite of the source signal, they are adding together and they are basically canceling each other out. And this happens for real, in real life, all the time, okay? So this is why if you ever play a sine wave in your room, which I'm gonna talk about in a second, and you walk around your room, you're gonna get spots where that sine wave sounds louder or where it sounds quieter, where it disappears altogether. And this is because of this phase cancellation. Now, it doesn't always just get quieter, it can also get louder, and that happens if the two are in phase, okay? So again, back with the whole math chart analogy, if it bounces back and it's in phase, so now you've got the red, which is the bounce back one, okay, so we'll say that's +1, then you get the yellow, that's also +1, 1 + 1 is 2, right? Which means that you've now doubled your volume, which is why, again, if you walk in, say, the corner of your studio, your sound is all of a sudden going to be twice as loud as it was if you were standing in another spot because of the way that these waves have bounced back and caused this phase addition, okay? So, enough with the math. Let's see how this works in Ableton Live. In this example here, I have a sine wave set up. Okay, so what I have here set up in this project is a instrument rack with 2 operators in it, and it's only going to be playing a C3 sine wave, right? Just to demonstrate this principle, okay? So how I have it set up is I have one operator just playing a normal sine wave, and then I have another operator that's also playing a sine wave, but I've mapped the phase, which is this guy right down here, to a macro knob. And what the phase means is I can adjust this knob here, and that, if you look over here, is going to adjust where operator starts playing the sine wave from. So by default, it starts playing it in the middle, and then it goes up and down and back to the middle again. I can adjust that phase and say, okay, well, actually, I want you to start playing at this top, and then go down and then back up again. So I can adjust the phase of just the one operator, and you'll notice the second operator is not bound to that button, okay? So I'm only adjusting one. Now, if I play them both at the same time, you'll see that what's happening is both operators are playing and their levels are registering -12 on the meter, okay? However, you'll notice that the master output here, where they're combining, is playing at -6, right? So what's happening is their phases are playing perfectly in phase. They're both starting in the middle and then going up and down and up and down. And what's happening is exactly that thing that we saw in the chart earlier. They are playing in phase, and I'm adding them together, and they're getting twice as loud, okay? Now, here comes the fun bit, and this is happening in your room constantly as you mix, all right? So this is what you're fighting against. So as I adjust the phase here, you can see what's happening. All of a sudden my master meter's dropped, okay? So I'm now playing, this operator is starting at the top and then going down. So they're like a little bit out of phase, but my level has dropped a bit. And as I increase the phase, until it's completely out of phase, like magic, it's gone, okay? So what's happened is now operator 1 is going, starting at the middle and then going up and then down. This operator is starting in the middle and then going down and then up, okay? So if you remember the chart, now they're perfectly out of phase. So because this is mathematically as perfect as we can get, it is literally canceling out everything, 100%, okay? So you can see that operator A and B are still spitting out their sound. However, they are now perfectly out of phase. So when I add them together, you're not hearing anything, okay? So this is happening in your room. So this is why your kick drums sound super great in your room, and then you listen to them in a car or at a buddy's house and they sound very weak. Or they sound way, way, way too boomy. It's because you are mixing with all of these issues in your room. You've got this weird phase cancellation going on, which makes it seem like you need to mix your kick really, really loud in order to hear it, because you've got these phase cancellations going on. Make sense? It's pretty crazy when you actually play one of these sine waves in your room, which I highly recommend. Play a sine wave around 100 hertz or 60 hertz or something kind of low, set it on a loop, play it pretty loud, and walk around your room and see where your hot spots are, because you're gonna get a very good idea of where the sound is combining to get you that raised level, and also where it's canceling out, where things just kind of disappear. I know in my studio, I have it set up now so my mix position is the best spot in the studio. So I know in my studio that if I lean back in my chair and I go back maybe half a foot or so, I drop about 20 dB at 50 hertz. So all of a sudden my kick drum and all my bass just kind of goes boop and disappears, okay? So I know the deficiencies in my room and I've worked around them, and I have a lot of acoustic treatment in there. So I'm going to show you how you can also get your own acoustic treatment and how you can find these hot spots in your room and deal with them to make mixing so much easier in your studio.
So I took an online course at Beat Drop, and now I can make the music I've always really wanted to.
The course I took at Beat Drop had really great videos. They were clear and really easy to follow.
I was really excited to be taught by someone who was so obviously a pro. And he always took this approach that wasn't condescending in any way. It was very open and willing to learn and engage.
Those teachers are professionals. They have years and years of experience, so they know students' struggles. They know what really students want to know.
The individual attention you can get is really helpful, because you have a teacher right there who you can just ask a question and it just gets solved just like that. I've made so much progress just because of the teachers and the classes and the curriculum.
I liked that I got a goal assigned to me each week. That helped keep me motivated. But the biggest help by far was the feedback from the instructors. That alone was worth the price of the course.